Hi, friends. It's V at Under the Desk News, and I'm here with my pal Nancy Gibbs at the Harvard
Hi.
School. What's going on?
All in a day's work here at Harvard. Things are very calm, quiet, nothing's
Yeah,
happening.
totally chill.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything about Harvard in the news lately. Just kidding. We are big Harvard stands over here. The Dust Bunnies love the fellowship that I have with the Shorenstein Center.
We love having you here.
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
We say that we go to school here, which is not exactly true because it's a fellowship, not a classroom thing. But, you know, we're included in the Harvard community, and that means a lot. So tell me, what is a day in the life of Nancy Gibbs like?
Oh, that's so funny. Depends on whether I'm teaching. If I'm teaching, then I'm really, really focused on, like, what am I trying to get through today and planning lectures and all of that. During times when I'm not teaching, then I'm focused on this center. We're trying to understand about information, about news, about how people understand the world, and how, as you are living evidence, how much that has changed. So that's what we study here. But even figuring out how to study that is really hard, which is why bringing in fellows is so important. And then I spend a lot of time raising money, which is just the weirdest thing, because as everyone has been learning these last few months, isn't Harvard the richest university in the world, and doesn't it have all this money? No, we spend a lot of time. You can't do anything unless you can raise the money to do it. So that's been really weird.
That is something that folks really don't understand because they're like, Harvard's got this $50 billion endowment, all this stuff. They should just be rich as hell. Everything should be happening there. And then you got the $2.2 billion or whatever it was held back from the federal government. And they're like, why is the federal government giving Harvard money if they're so rich? Why are they?
So I didn't understand that either. And in fact, when I came here now 7 years ago, I thought, oh, good. I'm leaving a traditional newsroom where we were constantly trying to figure out, like, where's the revenue going to come from? And I'm going to go to this rich university where I'm never going to have to worry about money again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was wrong.
No.
The issue is, yes, there's a $53 billion endowment. 80% of that is restricted, which means if someone 100 years ago endowed a chair in medieval literature, you can't take that money and spend it on something else. So the vast majority of that money you can't touch for anything other than what it was meant for. And then the other real misunderstanding about the federal funding, and they just announced like yesterday that there will be no new federal funding, is I think that the phrase that the Secretary of Education used was about Harvard not deserving the largesse of the federal government, as though these are gifts from the government to universities. I totally understand why a reasonable person would say, yeah, why should taxpayers be giving money to these universities? What these are is sort of like business transactions. If the National Institutes of Health are really concerned about tuberculosis, which is the most deadly single infectious agent in the world.
I've met John Green. I'm familiar with tuberculosis.
And so they will put out a call for proposals of who has an idea for understanding and addressing tuberculosis. And universities all over the country will apply for that federal funding. It's very competitive. It's a very rigorous process. And if you win that grant, you are promising the government that in return for that grant, you are going to adhere to this budget with this staffing and these deliverables on this timetable. And so it's like you're being contracted to do work that the government thinks is important. And so the vast majority of the money that's coming in is going to like our hospitals, medical schools, School of Public Health, to do work that I think most people want to see done. And so I think it would be different. It's like we're going to stop funding Harvard's English department. Like there are a lot of English majors in the world who would think that's a bad idea. But like I'm going to be spending tomorrow afternoon at Dana-Farber Cancer Center where I am a patient. It's one of the best cancer institutes in the world. I don't think people signed on for the idea that we don't want to support literally some of the institutions that have done more to save lives and cure disease and advance the public welfare. And so I think maybe Harvard has and other universities did not do a very good job explaining how they're funded and how that works, and so has learned, oh, we need to be talking about this. So I love the fact that like we've been seeing the monkeys on,
People were upset.
People were upset about
that was the touchstone moment, though. I mean, I grew up just outside New Haven, right? So I had this great understanding that if you went to Yale for something, it was great. And I also had this great understanding of how much research they were doing and like trying new, medicines and different stuff there. I guess the average American didn't maybe grow up outside Yale and or outside Harvard, where they understand that the university is getting the money from the federal government to provide a product or service. It, like you said, it's transactional. It's not like they're just giving it to like put their name on a wall somewhere and go to a fancy dinner every so often. The government gets something in return for it. And if they didn't give it to a university, who would they give it to?
Well, this is the other thing is here's an irony, is that this whole idea of a partnership between universities and their labs and research centers doing sort of basic scientific, you don't know what the benefit profit outcome will be. You're doing basic scientific research that then fuels innovation and the invention of drugs and of technologies. That whole transaction really accelerated during World War II, trying to figure out radar technologies over at labs at MIT. And you know who one of the drivers of that was? That would be President Trump's Uncle John.
No.
Who is an unbelievably important scientist.
How do we get stuck with the bunk Trump? Where's John?
So John Trump was an extraordinary scientist, and out of that work and those labs came this idea that having the federal government be supporting basic scientific research is going to benefit the country, the economy, our public health in all sorts of ways. And this is where we get so many of the technologies we take for granted, certainly the medications and treatments we take for granted. And so that kind of contribution to the general public good and the role that research and science plays in that, it's like we're getting a crash course in that. The harm of what has been happening, of the government saying we're not going to fund universities anymore, we may not know that for years. It's like we won't know what immunotherapy might have been life-saving and been available to patients 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now that will be delayed or won't happen. That won't be visible to us. But you talk to these researchers who put their heart and soul into this work. They are so mission-driven. And to say, yeah, you get a stop work order right now. You cannot continue. It isn't like you can pick up that trial at some point when you're flicking an on and off switch. You will lose years of work and of valuable data. And so I think that there's a lot that all universities, including this one, it just happens Harvard is the one that's in the headlines and the crosshairs, but just has to explain way more clearly about the potential costs that people are going to feel, our kids are going to feel years from now.
Can you talk about the emotional impact on the university also? Because, they're losing the funding. We can talk about the tangible loss of research and innovation, but Harvard is the American dream. I mean, that's not something I've made up. That's something lots of people say, right? And maybe it has to do with the Kennedys being the, first family at the time and all of that. But there's this idea of going to Harvard as breaking generational issues with education and kind of making it for the kids who are coming into school now and maybe wanted to be a researcher. They get into Harvard, they think that they have this path, they followed a particular professor or innovation that they wanted to be a part of while they were here, and now they're here, and they're like, now what? What has the emotional impact been for the school to see folks from the outside kind of destroy the progress and the dream that they've been building for people?
I mean, I think we're living through this all these layers of emotional impact. At a really basic level, and here at the Kennedy School, more than half of our students are coming from countries outside the U.S. So we have a very basic question of, are they going to be able to, if they go home for the summer, will they be able to get back in the fall? Will they be able to complete their degrees? For all the students who wanted to go into international development, who wanted to work on food security, which I know you have a background in, or global health issues, that so much of that global infrastructure that was driven by funding and resources and research coming out of the U.S. is dissolving and is moving to other countries, other institutions. So, you have the immediate, will I be able to complete my degree? Have I taken on all of this debt and I won't be able to? And then you have just I had a vision, a purpose in my life of what I wanted to do. And it might not have been an easy path. There were never going to be any guarantees. But like now the road I thought I was on, it's just like a sinkhole has now opened in front of me. And I have to completely change path. And I think that's really hard. These are talented, hopeful kids, and the university is trying to provide a lot of support for them. But I think that has been really hard for a lot of them, especially on ones for whom they're hit very personally at a level of fear, even before you get to disappointment or, their ambitions being thwarted, of just basic fear about moving around, the city, about traveling, any of that.
Yeah, you came here to cure cancer, and now you might end up in a detention center because somebody doesn't think you have the right paperwork all of a sudden. Why is it that so many international students want to come to the United States to study, and how does that benefit the country?
I love having this mix of students in my class. So I teach about information, I teach about the press and how people's political understanding is shaped. And having students in the classroom who, not just the ones who've grown up watching American television and reading our press, but who have come from countries with very repressive, more authoritarian leadership that did not have a free press, whose access to information was very different. It just widens your aperture. It makes you not take things for granted. It makes you challenge your assumptions about, if you think the systems that your country has developed are the best ones, and then now you have to test them against other students who come from other systems. Being around people who are really different is what makes us smarter. Being around people who disagree with us is what makes us smarter. And I love seeing students get into an argument where you sort of feel the room agreeing with each person who has spoken. It's like, oh, that's a good point. Oh, but wait, that's a good point too. And like, that's how we learn. That's how we sharpen our arguments. That's how we become more persuasive as leaders. And so I think it would be a tragedy, not just for students, but for us as an institution and the problems we're trying to solve, if we had a less diverse group of people able to be here challenging us and pushing us.
There are folks out there, though, that are like, well, if we're not taking all these foreign students, there's more opportunity for American kids. Is it a one-for-one trade?
I don't think so. It's too bad that I wish Harvard could get much bigger. I wish all of our universities were a lot more affordable for a lot more people. The fact that the size of our student body hasn't changed that much. I think it may be even that what is happening, unintended consequences, but some very good things could come out of it. And the way good things came out of COVID, even though no one would have wished a pandemic on the world. Yeah. But like the ability now for us to create really innovative models of teaching that might be scalable, and the thinking that goes into, okay, what is it that limits your ability to reach people who can't physically come to Cambridge or sit in a classroom, or who have to hold down a job and can't be full-time students, all of that stuff. Huge amount of innovation going into what is it that we want to create that will allow people to learn things, develop skills that they can then apply to serve their communities, their countries. And I think that a lot of good will come out of being forced to think about being more agile and innovative in how we think about education.
I mean, I'm down for more Harvard for more people. I think that works, right? As a new media person, this is like more news for more people in many ways. I consider myself like top of the funnel on news, where in the past it was like, okay, there was like 4 or 5 channels. That's all that you could do. And now there's hundreds of channels, if not millions of channels to get information, which again has its ups and downs, right?
It does. And it's funny how people talk about how having more information available makes them feel like it's harder to stay informed because they just have to sort out, okay, and where I think here's such an interesting example is the way that you have built trust with your audience of like, okay, I trust what V tells me when they explain something about how tariffs work or about how, immigration law works and enforcement works. But finding the people who you trust used to sort of wasn't much of a choice. You had like 3 broadcast networks and 2 news magazines and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. There were a lot of stories that were never told and a lot of ideas that were never shared in that environment. But there was also a lot of crazy that never got traction. And so now watching people try to figure out, it is amazing that there are so many ways to reach people and that you don't have to have a broadcast network behind you. But it also really worries me that the technology that allows us to create and spread and scale not just stuff that's wrong, but stuff that's dangerous and harmful, either your health or to our civic health, honestly terrifies me.
Let's talk about that, because I this week was a victim of deepfake, which I never thought that would happen to me, because I think like, oh, that's something that happens to like celebrities or politicians. And then it happened to me, and it was so incredibly convincing. You guys know there was a deepfake where somebody somewhere made a very convincing ad for anti-aging
really looks and sounds
products.
like you.
It looks exactly like me. It sounds exactly like me. It's not like AI where anything is funny. They've just somehow manipulated the mouth a little bit, but the cadence of my voice, everything is matched perfectly. It was obviously very trained on me. And that scared the shit out of me, Nancy.
That's a parasitical business model where you invest so much head and heart and time into creating this trusted relationship with your audience that they are now going to feed off of. And like, you at least are in a position that you immediately were alerted and you were able to, push back. An individual creator who doesn't have the kind of radar array that you have is going to be incredibly vulnerable to this.
Well, and how much did I lose that I don't even know that I lost, right? Because so many people scroll and they're like, ew, I don't like that. I'm not following them. I got comments from people saying like, ew, sell out. Like, why would you say this? B, this is fear mongering. And I'm like, one, it's not on my official account, right? So the blue check does nothing to really verify me, because people are, when you're scrolling on social media, your guard is down mostly. You're just kind of like taking in what's going on, looking for some entertainment, a break. So it didn't matter that it wasn't on my official account. It didn't matter that it didn't even say Under the Desk News is the account. It was like Zululolo something. It didn't matter that it was completely off-brand for me to do something like that. I still had a bunch of people who made a comment saying like, ew, I hate this. How many people just unfollowed me? I'll never know, right? We used to have this issue when I worked in the restaurant where we would be thankful for the Yelp reviews, because even if they were rotten, somebody cared enough to tell me what went wrong. How many nice people just don't come back, right? And so that's the damage with this deepfake situation. Is this was an ad. It was kind of easy to tell. I got it quick.
Yeah, wait till it's your presidential endorsement.
Wait till it's that. Wait till it's the midterms, right? And they're dropping in little 15-second, 30-second clips about something that maybe isn't true. Wait till they have my deepfake say something terrible. And that's all stuff that we know from me would be I'd be a victim of that. What I actually worry about a little bit more is, because the deepfakes are so good, how many people are going to say, oh, that wasn't me. That was a deepfake. And it was them. That, I think, is the other side of the coin that's so dangerous.
There's something that the philosophers call the liar's dividend, where once it becomes clear that it's really, that a lot of people are lying or creating deepfakes, then you
can't trust anything.
You can't trust anything. And it's, it's right out of an authoritarian playbook where you can give a different explanation for some bad thing that happened every day, and they can be completely contradictory. The goal isn't to make people believe one explanation or another. The goal is that people say, well, I'm never going to know the truth, so I'm going to give up trying.
Give up. Exactly.
And you just make people give up even trying to find out. And like, if you believe, as I do, that like you can't have a healthy society without access to reliable information, like that's the baseline. You're not going to solve any problems about justice or climate or education or poverty or anything if we don't have an information environment where people can tell what is and is not true, and then argue over what should we do about this problem. And I think this is the challenge of our time. I think of I describe information as the battle surface of the 21st century.
Yes.
And so for young people now, I mean, I'm old. I lived through a different, political and information environment. But my parents were a wartime generation. Mm-hmm. And I think today's young people are a wartime generation. If you look at so Pew does really interesting research about where people get information. And you look at like people over 50 or over 65. They're still overwhelmingly watching news on television. They're reading newspapers. If I ask my, one of my daughters, said, "Oh, I'm going to be on the evening news tonight," they would struggle to know how to go watch that until they saw it on YouTube, right?
Until it shows up on social.
There is a huge generational difference in where people are getting their information, and obviously, for younger people, it's way more digital, it's way more social media driven. They're way more likely to trust individuals than institutions, and so this is going to be the generation that is going to have to figure out, okay, how do we create an environment where people have access, like it's a human right, that reliable information is a human right. I don't know how you can keep your family safe or, prosper economically or be healthy if you are swimming in fake information and information that's trying to rob you or hurt you.
And it happens with disaster recovery. It happens with them eliminating like the weather service or trying to eliminate the weather service or privatize it. And then in the meanwhile, on social media, you see AI slop of like RFK Jr. carrying cats through a disaster zone after a flood. And it's like, that's not real. But people feel like it's real because it's made them feel something. This sort of like dystopian nonsense, nothing is true. We're flooded with so much slop and misinformation. How do we deal with that? How do young people deal with that? I kind of have, like, I'm 42, right? So I have this background of being like, okay, well, I think I learned critical thinking. I still read newspapers. I know how to watch the news on TV if I want to. I know how to discern right from wrong. But for folks who have grown up in the internet age where it has been an equal match of good information and slop, like, how do we teach them right from wrong in many ways?
I mean, that's such a good and hard question. Yeah. One of the things I think is really important, and which I can require my students to do because I get to grade them, but I can't assign other people homework, which is to be intentional about your news diet. And that doesn't only mean, being rigorous about, testing, is this a reliable source? But whatever news and information sources you like, to periodically change them up. And so if you're, a regular consumer of a set of progressive content creators, spend some time listening to conservative ones. If you're always watching Fox News, go watch CNN, CNBC, and MSNBC sometimes. Try only non-U.S., if you're an American, try just, 48 hours of reading about, listening to, hearing about the United States only from people who aren't here.
I watch a lot of German news. I like the German coverage
of
the American experience.
So what does that do? How does that make you think?
When you're going through a breakup and you have a friend who's gone through a breakup with like a similar type of narcissist and they're trying to like walk you through your breakup and they're like, okay, so how did that make you feel? And what did you learn from that day? And how often does he do that? That's how I feel like the German news talks to America because they've been through authoritarian sort of like far right drama. So when they cover something, they're almost like, the United States is attacking the health institutes right now. Now, what do we know about that? And it's kind of like, I always feel like there's a little bit of them trying to like bring along the audience without like straight out calling it out hard. But I think that they have sort of like this legacy knowledge of what it's like to go through what a lot of us feel like we're going through now. And so their coverage is both sympathetic and kind of like, okay, you're going to have to come through it, but when you do, we'll be on the other side of it for you. But I think they cover things much more fairly and directly, and that's very German of them, right? To be very efficient. Whereas sometimes BBC, I'm like, okay, BBC is, it's a news service, it's good, but it's still a little bit Americanized, a little salacious, and their news anchors fight on TV, which I think is hilarious. They're like much more animated. I find Germany's coverage to be very like, now we're going to talk about America. Okay.
That's really interesting.
And it gets it to you quick in a way that I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm watching a good friend on the outside help me break up with a narcissist. So I'm always like looking to them to be like, how bad is it? It's really that bad? Okay, because it feels bad. And they're like, it's bad. It's bad.
In my dreams, this question would not be a political or a partisan question. That there wouldn't be a conservative position and a liberal position on this. Like if you look at like what kids are dying from measles, because their parents were told things that aren't true. It's like these are questions that affect everyone, everywhere, and a lot of the garbage information is driven by people looking to make money. I mean, the people who are making a deep fake of you, this is probably not a partisan agenda. They're selling anti-aging stuff, and so like everyone has an interest in it not being profitable to lie to people and it not being profitable to sell poisons and fake cures to people. And so the reason at this center we feel like we really need a way deeper understanding of how people are getting information and how it affects their behavior, how people decide who to trust in the first place. There's so much we don't know about this. It was a lot easier when you could ask people, why do you trust Walter Cronkite more than you trust Chet Huntley? Right?
Well, now it's like, why do you trust scientists? They're nerds and they're lying to you. And they're trying to like, the thing that I've found most annoying about the current media ecosphere is the way that it's like being at a sixth grade lunch table again. It's like people who don't do the reading and don't go to class are all of a sudden have so much power and are trying to tell folks who are like nerdy about the thing they care about, whether that's the school newspaper or that's science, that they're wrong. And they're bullying them into giving up in many ways or into not having access to the lab that they need to continue to do their work. We see this. I have a friend who is at the NIH and is talking about just like the absolute bullying that she's experiencing there, where people are like doing whack stuff like stealing people's lunch or like leaving them shitty notes. And it's like, how is this the adult ecosphere that we are sending young people out into to try and combat?
But also, at the National Institutes of Health, like, tell me who is against health.
Right.
Tell me who is against. We can disagree about what are the most effective ways of improving public health. What are the best allocations of public health resources? Let's have those arguments. I mean, but No,
they want to fight about if we should wear prairie dresses and drink raw milk, though. And I'm like, you know what? If that's what works for your family, then I guess do what you're going to do, right? But when you start to involve children in the general public and we want to put this idea of like removing basic standards of health and public health on the broader community and the like societal contract we have with each other, then it starts to be like, maybe this has gone too far.
So one of the things, especially around health and science issues, that worries me is, ideally, these questions are determined by rigorous, randomized, controlled clinical trials. Like you may have a theory about something is safe or not, good or not, but you have to test it. You don't just get to act on your instincts, beliefs, theology. Like you have to test it. And so, again, that seems to me like it should exist outside of politics. And when you get something wrong, you want to be able to say, yeah, I got that wrong. And it sort of still amazes me that we went into the pandemic where like the whole world at the same time is facing this incredible challenge and threat to people. And even that, like a respiratory virus, even that became hugely politicized. And so I don't, how do you make politics boring again?
It comes down to the money again, though. There were people who profited from denying the pandemic. There were people who profit from saying that autism is caused by vaccines. I mean, Jenny McCarthy was like the original influencer on medical information when it came to like, she was a popular celebrity figure at the time. She came out with this statement. A lot of people believed it. A lot of people have suffered because of it. She's since tried to like remove herself from the responsibility of like that path beginning. But now we have RFK Jr. in the White House administration, and a lot of what he's doing is sort of, again, giving more credence to or more credibility to folks who are influencers and celebrities than the scientists. How do we get back to
Well,
the
it's like,
scientists?
and it's like he understands that those influencers and celebrities are increasingly the people who are trusted instead of
Right.
the scientists.
Right.
And
Tricky spot, man.
the here's one thing that encourages me is that, I have faculty members whose whole focus is how do we address polarization? How do we figure out how to communicate across these ferocious partisan divides? And that you would not know it just to, consume information or spend 5 minutes on social media. But there are so many things that the vast majority of people agree on. Like the vast majority of people agree that, reasonable gun control, common sense gun control laws make sense. Or that, what was Bill Clinton's formulation of abortion as safe, legal, and rare, right? Like they don't want it to be outlawed, but they want it, they certainly want women to have access to birth control so that you have fewer unwanted pregnancies so that you don't need to have as many abortions. There are so many things around even the really hot button immigration issues and that these are 60, 70, 80% issues. You would never know that from the way where we haven't just said that the people who disagree with us are wrong. We've decided, and they're bad, and they're dangerous, and they must be crushed. And I think until we change that dynamic, where we make it personal, it's not a disagreement. It's like you're bad, and so like that's going to take a huge amount of work. And there are lots of things that work, and there's someone who said, it's impossible to hate someone whose story you know. And so any of us who have people in our family who hold different beliefs than we do doesn't mean we stop loving them. We're not going to agree with each other, but like we've complexified it, right? It's like, yeah, you're complicated. I think you're crazy on these things, but I also know what a good person you are and all the. And so I don't know how we rebuild those reflexes, but I think
we have to get back in person. That's what Gloria Steinem told me. She's like, I was like, how do we fix this? And she was like, you need to start inviting people over to your living room again. She's like, people don't spend enough time in person. And I tell this anecdote of like, got a flat tire. First person to stop to help me is a MAGA guy, right? Because he's a guy with a big truck and he sees a lady on the side of the road who needed some help. And like, that's who it's going to be. This is not a person who would otherwise think like, oh, I'm going to help that person or I'm going to have an interaction with that person. But in an actual human moment, that was how it worked out. And I think there is more of that, like you're saying, than we expect. It's just that social media or the way that things in the world have been told to us are true are not actually true when it comes down to like the human interaction of just
how do we do that?
I got to get more flat tires is what I've come to learn, and flag down more trucks. But I think it is that idea, right, of like giving people the benefit of the doubt to meet you in a situation to say that you're not fully canceled because you've done something that I don't agree with. And I do think that the major issue in our society right now is that people have a very strong, especially Americans, have a very strong protective instinct. We don't call ourselves the back-to-back World War II champs, for nothing. Like there's this a part of patriotism is that we are the protector, that we're the helper, that we're the city on the sea, all that kind of stuff. I just think people's protective instinct got triggered to protect the wrong things. And what they were told to protect was girls' sports, right? But but it's not actually some 8-year-old kid who just wants to play soccer with their friends that is a threat to women's sports. It's the lack of funding and opportunity and respect for the industry. We don't need to protect this country from immigrants. We need to protect this country from foreign adversaries who seek to divide us more, right? We don't need to protect our schools from books that we don't totally agree with. We need to understand that there are multiple types of families. And it's really beneficial for a kid to see a book on the library shelf, even if it's just one, that's about having 2 moms.
So I want to go back to your question about, how do we prepare this, the wartime generation? And the one through line, maybe the one superpower that addresses a lot of this, it turns out, happily, as I say, talking to someone who does this for a living, is curiosity.
Yeah.
There's really interesting studies that one of my faculty members did of that taking two people who agree with each other, like two very MAGA people or two very progressive people who agree with each other, but they don't view each other as terribly curious or receptive, and found that they were less likely to come out of a conversation inclined to trust each other and collaborate than two people who totally disagree about everything, but who are like, so how did you come to think that way? Did something happen that made that such a strong concern of yours, that genuinely expressed curiosity about how the person came to their beliefs? That those people who share nothing in common, like ideologically, but who viewed the other as receptive and curious, much more likely to say, yeah, I would work with that person. I would change their tire.
Yeah.
I would. And so, like, curiosity is it's the engine of journalism. It's the engine of the creator economy. It's like, go find things out and tell other people about it. So that's what makes me optimistic. If, we need an epidemic of curiosity about including how did this country founded and carrying these beliefs about freedom, about equality, about justice, about being a city on a hill, about being a force for good. What is happening to it? And have we lost sight of those values? What are they just being expressed in different ways? How do we understand that? And really being curious about, we're surrounded by people who disagree with us. Okay, why is that? How do we understand that? So.
I think you're right, Nancy. I think every single time I've taken the time to hear someone out, and oftentimes when I do talks at schools, I'll have certain people who come who are decidedly against me. And they'll wait for the Q&A and raise their hand and say their thing, or they'll wait till after and be like, I need to talk to you about something. And I'm like, you care enough to come all the way down here to meet with me because you think that I'll be receptive. You think that there's something that we can share that you trust enough to take time out of your day as a person who disagrees with me and want to be like, can you tell me why you do that? Because I don't know why you do that. And I'm like, and then I'll tell them. And
so
then we'll
both
go back
they're
and forth.
genuinely curious about you, and they are anticipating that you are going to be open to that and want to hear that question and engage with it.
And honestly, it has done wonders for my experience with young people in an academic setting, which I think is, such a unique time in your life when you get to be in a place where asking questions and making mistakes is part of the process. That's not like that in the real world. You say something out there, it's all different. It's much heavier weighted. And I've heard from teachers after I've done talks that it spurred more conversation in that class, right? That either made them attend my talk or whatever, to say, okay, well, what did we learn from this chat? What did we challenge about ourselves? What do you still believe? What are you inflexible on? What are you more flexible on? Were you surprised by the conversation you had with V? Were you surprised that V allowed you the time to speak, even though they didn't have to? What about that interaction made sense to you? And how could we do more of that to bring ourselves together as a class or as a whatever? And I think that is really good professorism. And I think that is kind of exactly the way we get out of it, right? It's going to be good, Nancy. We're going to make it happen. Me and Nancy Gibbs solving all of the problems right here at Harvard University. Do you have a parting thought for folks right now?
It gets harder to do this, but it's, words to live by. Practice gratitude. It's really easy to look around and be really worried, and I can get as doomery as anyone. But every day, and maybe it's partly being here where we feel like we really are, it's like living working in Midtown Manhattan after 9/11, where you feel like there's a bullseye on you and you really feel a different kind of sense of foreboding. But that also brought out real expressions of courage and creativity and a kind of nimbleness of, don't take anything for granted. How do we adjust to this? How do we get smarter about things we need to be doing, and how do we do that better? And
what does it mean to be a New Yorker? I remember it changed so much. And now maybe we're facing, what does it mean to be an American?
And so I think that, we all have the choice every day, every minute. Do you go for bitterness or gratitude? And picking, even to the extent that you can, of leaning into gratitude, or how do we make something of this that is good? How do we take what's bad about this and turn it into something good? That too is a fuel cell. And I'm seeing every day, I'm seeing people rise to the occasion. I'm seeing people step up in big ways and small. And I think we're going to see that in our communities, in our institutions, and in individuals, and not take for granted things that we just never asked ourselves about or thought about before. So that's where my hope is.
I love it. Thanks, Nancy, for your time. I will be darkening your doorstep once a month for the next several months. So